Good afternoon, bonjour, buenas tardes. That's as far as my Spanish goes. Just bear with me, I need to navigate the devices. So we want to welcome you. We want to welcome you to this particular panel today. And I know it's been a long day, it's been a long 2 days, but I'm hoping you have some energies and that we can have a wonderful session today as we share. I certainly am sharing the platform with some very distinguished folks. I'm the least of the apostles, so I feel very privileged. And then you in the room, I know it makes the world of a difference um, today as we enter into this discussion on how we will improve housing policies and practices for resilient and green communities. I want to introduce the members of the panel, and I'm just going to call them on first name basis. And when they get the mic, they will certainly pronounce their surnames. I'm doing this so that I wouldn't mispronounce anybody's surname. So I'm going to start with Angela. 1 second. So Angela represents all of Spain, and she's the Deputy Director General of Urban Policies in the Ministry of Transport, Mobility, and Urban Agenda. She's a lawyer with over 30 years' experience in the central government of Spain, an expert in urban regulations, and responsible for the Spanish urban agenda. I didn't get to ask Angela one fun thing about herself, so I'm going to ask her when she takes the mic to tell us something fun about herself. We have Amanda. Amanda is the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity, Puerto Rico. And the fun thing about Amanda, she doesn't think it's fun, but I think it is. She's the mother of 3 boys. That has to be real fun. 13, 11, and 9. I could just imagine she will be the fittest one in the room because boys normally have you running. She's a lawyer by profession and comes with a wealth of experience from the Habitat perspective. So I know you're going to have some rich discussions today on the Puerto Rico experience, especially after the disaster. We have Siren, Program Manager Officer at the UN Habitat and lead of the flagship Resilient Settlements for the Urban Poor, Rise Up, mobilizing and coordinating large-scale investment for urban adaptation and resilience. She's an international lawyer by profession, but she does Indian dance professionally, so that's the fun thing about Siren. I was trying to get a fun thing about Brent as I introduce him, and I think he comes with a bit of Spanish dancing under his belt. Brent is the CEO of the Home Mortgage Bank in Trinidad and Tobago, and he's had over 15 years of experience in the financial world. So we have a lot of experts here, and they're going to share with us some of their experiences. I'm hoping out of this that we can understand how we will improve housing policies and practices. We want to share the knowledge and experience from the panelists. And if they've encountered any best practice, they will certainly share them with us. And then we will talk about some of the challenges, and then if you have any questions and answers, I'm going to invite you. There is an app that you can either post the questions there, but I'm thinking that since we're small in number, it would just be easy for you to take the mic and ask the question, and then we will respond. Is that okay? All right, and if when you start, you want to tell us something fun about yourself, it's going to be a fun afternoon. Who says housing is not fun? I can tell you that. It's a lot of fun. So I'm going to start with Angela. All right? And so we've particularly asked in a specific order today because we want to move from policy all the way to the practical on the ground with my friends on the panel. So they know the order, and I'm going to give the floor to Angela.
Muchas gracias por la invitación. Quería que cargaran, por favor, la presentación. Es muy breve, solo tiene 3 diapositivas. Mi idea es responder a las preguntas que ha comentado la moderadora desde la perspectiva de un gobierno central. En este foro estamos conociendo muchísimas prácticas locales, muchísimas prácticas subnacionales y me ha parecido en alguna ocasión entrever alguna crítica a los gobiernos centrales, probablemente porque son sistemas que están poco descentralizados, ¿no? No es el caso de España. Voy a contextualizar el esquema español. España es un Estado fuertemente descentralizado. Tenemos el Estado central, tenemos 17 comunidades autónomas y tenemos 8.126 municipios. Todos ellos gozan de autonomía política y financiera para la gestión de sus respectivos intereses. Y en esta materia en concreto es importante que ustedes sepan que el urbanismo y la vivienda son competencias exclusivas del ámbito subnacional, no del Estado central. Son competencias de las comunidades autónomas y esta competencia se comparte con los ayuntamientos. De tal manera que desde el Estado, si queremos intervenir en estas políticas, es a base de dinero. Podemos hacer política económica de vivienda, ayudar a las comunidades autónomas y a los ayuntamientos con inversión, pero no podemos intervenir en la regulación de la materia ni en la gestión de la materia, porque es una competencia de comunidades autónomas y de ayuntamientos. En materia medioambiental sí que hablamos de una competencia concurrente. Las bases de la protección medioambiental se establecen a escala nacional y esto significa que las comunidades autónomas y los ayuntamientos pueden proteger el medio ambiente más que el Estado, pero en ningún caso menos. Bueno, teniendo en cuenta que este es el contexto territorial, institucional y político de España, ya podemos abordar el esquema de los retos que tenemos planteados en relación con la necesidad de ser más resilientes, ¿no?, en relación con el cambio climático. No tenemos riesgos tan graves como los que se padecen en otras regiones del mundo, pero sí que es cierto que todos los riesgos naturales que padecemos en España están vinculados al cambio climático. España es un país enormemente sensible al cambio climático. En la primera fotografía que tienen ustedes aquí, ven el mapa del incremento de las temperaturas previsto en España para el año 2050. Está previsto que alcancemos casi 3 grados centígrados más de temperatura que la que tenemos en la actualidad. Tenemos en España 8.000 kilómetros de costa. Somos una península y 2 archipiélagos, Islas Canarias, Islas Baleares. Por lo tanto, pueden ustedes imaginarse que la subida del nivel del mar nos está afectando muy gravemente. Tengo aquí el dato, el nivel del mar sube cada año 2,8 milímetros y es exactamente el doble del ritmo de aumento del nivel del mar que hemos tenido en España hasta el año 1990. Esto está produciendo no solo la pérdida de mucho equipamiento público, paseos marítimos, equipamiento que disfruta la ciudadanía, sino también muchos daños materiales en viviendas, desaparición de viviendas. España vive de frente, de cara al mar y no de espaldas al mar. Y, por lo tanto, la subida del nivel del mar es un riesgo natural importantísimo para nosotros. Las sequías persistentes. España se está convirtiendo en la España seca. La mitad de la península española padece sequías persistentes todos los años y esto contrasta con las lluvias torrenciales que nuestro compañero José Ramón comentaba ayer, que provoca inundaciones, crecidas de los ríos y graves problemas que, si no son de pérdidas de vidas humanas, sí son de gravísimas pérdidas materiales. Se pierden medios de trabajo, se pierde productividad y se generan muchísimos problemas. El último de los elementos son los pavorosos incendios. Tenemos un incremento de los incendios forestales en nuestro país de casi 5 veces los incendios que teníamos, la superficie forestal destrozada por incendios que teníamos en el año 2013. Estoy hablando de solo 10 años. En 10 años, en 2013, se quemaron en España 12.560 hectáreas. En el año 2023, y el verano no ha terminado, cuando salimos de Madrid hacía 38 grados centígrados de calor, cuando el verano aún no ha terminado, en España se han quemado ya en el año 2023 60.000 hectáreas y el verano no ha terminado. De acuerdo, ¿con qué mecanismos contamos en España para afrontar todos estos retos y ayudarnos a ser más resilientes? El primero de ellos es relativamente sencillo: legislación. Tenemos una ley de costas, una ley de aguas, una ley de montes. Por ejemplo, en la ley de montes en España se establece una norma que se aplica en todo el país de que los terrenos forestales incendiados no podrán ser usados de ninguna otra manera que como terreno forestal durante 30 años. Da igual si el incendio ha sido fortuito o por la mano del hombre, da exactamente igual. Durante 30 años ese suelo está protegido. Protegido prácticamente y jurídicamente, no se puede reclasificar ni recalificar. Urbanísticamente es intocable, es suelo forestal. Tenemos muchísimas medidas de protección en la ley de costas, en la ley de aguas, en la reciente ley de cambio climático y transición ecológica aprobada en el año 2021. De modo que lamento discrepar mucho con la alcaldesa de Bogotá, que comentaba ayer, y es de las pocas cosas con las que discrepo, pero en esta sí discrepo, cuando decía, y el gobierno de Colombia ha aprobado una ley. ¿Qué es una ley? Una ley no es nada. No, la nada es no tener ley. Tenemos que tener leyes. ¿Por qué? Porque esas leyes son las que trasladan determinadas exigencias que nos ayudan a ser más resilientes al planeamiento. Necesitamos planeamiento. Y todas estas medidas de protección se trasladan al planeamiento. En España no se hace nada sin planeamiento. Nada, no se puede construir, no se puede transformar con licencias directas. Tiene que haber un planeamiento urbanístico previamente aprobado. Y después de la legislación y el planeamiento, por supuesto, tenemos financiación. ¿Qué tipo de financiación tenemos para abordar estos problemas que hemos visto en estas fotografías? Tenemos, en primer lugar, seguros privados. Brent, este tema te interesará. En España, casi el 80% de las viviendas españolas tienen un seguro privado que protege a sus moradores y a sus propietarios frente a las pérdidas materiales, a la destrucción de la vivienda. ¿Qué ocurre cuando esos seguros privados no cubren esa eventualidad? Tenemos un consorcio de compensación de seguros. Es una entidad pública que se financia con las primas obligatorias que se incluyen en los seguros privados. Y si aún así no se cubren los problemas provocados y tenemos que indemnizar a las personas que sufren estos problemas, se puede decretar la situación de catástrofe, área catastrófica. Se le solicita al Gobierno de la Nación la declaración de zona catastrófica y esto conlleva importantísimas ayudas, subvenciones, bonificaciones fiscales, beneficios fiscales y beneficios laborales, cuotas a la seguridad social que no hay que pagar hasta que el negocio esté nuevamente siendo productivo, etc. De modo que todo esto se cierra con un botón que es participación de las comunidades en la resolución del problema. Tenemos que escucharles cuáles son sus problemas, cómo quieren que los resolvamos, tratar de hallar soluciones, y todo esto se hace con una adecuada gobernanza, donde los 3 escalones de administración participan. Participa el Estado, participan las comunidades autónomas y participan los ayuntamientos. Y cuando no hay una catástrofe, no hay discusión competencial. Todo el mundo, en España se utiliza un dicho, todo el mundo arrima el hombro. Todo el mundo, codo con codo, ayudando a solventar los problemas. Y ahora yo les pregunto a todos ustedes, si yo enumero todo esto del 1 al 5, ¿a ustedes esto qué les suena? Legislación, planeamiento, financiación, participación ciudadana y gobernanza. ¿Les suena a ustedes a algo? A la Agenda Urbana de las Naciones Unidas. La Agenda Urbana son las 5 recetas que da para hallar modelos de desarrollo urbano sostenible. Precisamente por esto es por lo que en España el mensaje de la agenda urbana, la metodología de la agenda urbana ha calado también. Ha calado también que aprobamos la agenda urbana española como política nacional en 2019 y estamos encontrando una implementación ilusionante y entusiástica de nuestros ayuntamientos, que están elaborando proyectos piloto de implementación de la agenda urbana porque encuentran en ella una metodología que funciona de acuerdo con los elementos que yo les he comentado. Por lo tanto, tenemos, por supuesto, un problema grave, un problema derivado del cambio climático que, sin duda, se traslada también al sector de la edificación. El sector de la edificación unido al sector de los transportes, que es el que garantiza el buen funcionamiento de una ciudad, es uno de los grandes causantes de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero a la atmósfera, con lo cual contribuye el funcionamiento de las ciudades, contribuye a la aceleración de los problemas más negativos del cambio climático. Y, por lo tanto, en las ciudades tenemos que encontrar mecanismos de mitigación. Ya sabemos que la mitigación en un esquema tan global es complicada, pero sobre todo de adaptación al cambio climático. Y en España esto es especialmente sensible por una razón, porque estamos en una región, estamos en una región que ha prometido ser el primer continente en conseguir la neutralidad, es decir, ser neutros en carbono en el año 2050. Y nosotros estamos dentro de la Unión Europea, este Europea Green Deal lo invade todo. El paquete de fondos ambiciosísimo Next Generation que ha llegado con fondos a los países europeos para gestionar la recuperación tras la COVID-19, nos somete a una presión tremenda en cuanto a la adopción de medidas de eficiencia energética en el parque edificado y dentro del funcionamiento de nuestras ciudades, en la movilidad, en los transportes. Claro, esto si lo llevamos a la edificación, hablamos de la edificación de las viviendas, esto está muy bien, hacemos una edificación muy eficiente, con una arquitectura de calidad, y esto está muy bien. Pero si esto está de espaldas al clima local y de espaldas a un planeamiento que tenga en cuenta el clima local, realmente no hemos hecho nada. Yo les voy a contar una anécdota personal muy breve. Yo, como decía Jennifer, yo soy abogado. Cuando me hicieron los planos de mi casa, yo llegué al trabajo desde hace muchos años con arquitectos, y llegué al trabajo toda ilusionada con los planos de mi casa. Mira mi casa, qué bien. Los arquitectos me dijeron: vete corriendo al ayuntamiento, para esto como sea. La calle os obliga a edificar la casa con la peor orientación posible. Vas a tener mucho calor en verano y mucho frío en invierno, y solo vas a poder solventar ese problema con calefacción y con aire acondicionado. Y claro, yo soy urbanista. Yo no fui al ayuntamiento, era inútil, porque el plan parcial era el que determinaba esa orientación de todas las viviendas que están en mi calle. Yo no me basta con esto, yo necesito planeamiento. Entonces, vuelvo a necesitar los 5 pasos, vuelvo a necesitar una legislación. En España tenemos el Código Técnico de la Edificación, que desde el año 2006 nos obliga a que nuestras edificaciones sean eficientes energéticamente. Pero no me vale. Yo necesito luego un planeamiento que sea responsable con el clima, que oriente adecuadamente las viviendas, que permita que estén ventiladas, que tengan luz, que estén en condiciones idóneas. Si no, no habré conseguido nada, ¿no? Por lo tanto, vuelvo a necesitar legislación, vuelvo a necesitar un planeamiento acorde con el clima. Y esto es suficiente. ¿Qué hacemos con la financiación aquí? Bueno, pues el Centro de Investigaciones Sociológicas español preguntó en la calle una amplísima encuesta que cuántos españoles estarían dispuestos a rehabilitar su vivienda. Yo les recuerdo que en España casi el 79% de la vivienda se tiene en propiedad, y la gente miraba a los encuestadores del CIS como si le estuvieran gastando una broma pesada. O sea, llevo 30 años pagando la hipoteca de mi casa, y ahora me pregunta usted si yo quiero rehabilitar mi casa. Pues mire, no. El porcentaje era pequeño, los que querían rehabilitar. Y cuando le preguntabas, ¿y si rehabilitara, qué haría? Baños y cocinas. Nadie habla de eficiencia energética. Por lo tanto, necesitamos un impulso público, la inversión pública que dinamice la rehabilitación, edificatoria y la regeneración urbana. De modo que vuelve a ser importantísima legislación, planeamiento, financiación, una adecuada gobernanza, un Estado potente que ponga dinero encima de la mesa, que transfiera ese dinero a las comunidades autónomas y a los ayuntamientos para que lo gestionen de manera más eficaz. Y por último, como me quedaba solo un minuto, si no hay legislación y no hay planeamiento, no se preocupen, también hay soluciones. Estas son las 6 claves. Si no tienen legislación y no tienen planeamiento y están en un esquema en el que parece ser que la legislación no sirve para nada, discrepo nuevamente, pues entonces tengamos mapas de riesgos naturales, mapas del clima, obligatorios para el planeamiento, lo incorporamos al planeamiento. Mire usted que yo no tengo planeamiento. Oiga, elabore estrategias, porque en el cambio climático influye todo. Influye la construcción de vivienda, influye la movilidad, influye el reciclaje, influyen multitud de elementos, la conservación de la biodiversidad, muchísimos elementos que en una estrategia que a lo mejor no tiene que tener carácter vinculante, pero si es transversal e integral, tiene muchísimos elementos que son de interés. Utilicemos materiales locales, materiales eficientes, materiales que tengan un buen reciclaje desde el punto de vista de la eficiencia energética. Complementemos todo esto con energías renovables. Cuando el país tiene mucho sol, tiene viento, tiene cauces salvajes, oiga, utilicemos eso como energías renovables. Reciclemos y, por último, metamos financiación pública en todo esto. Merece la pena. Nos estamos jugando la salud del planeta. Se me ocurren muchas cosas en las que podemos utilizar el dinero público, sin ninguna duda. Pero quizá esta es una de las más importantes. Muchísimas gracias.
Wow, how to follow after that? It's going to be really difficult. Love to have my presentation as well, please. Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. I'm very sure you're now very enticed and very engaged, and that was a really, really well presented eye-opener. So I don't know how to follow to that, but I'll try my best. My name is Serene Karikatotam, and as promised, I'm saying my last name correctly. I'm from Hábitat, and I'm coming into this discussion with a more climate lens. So what is actually within the housing and construction sector that can contribute to climate mitigation as well as to climate adaptation? And of course, we all know building and construction services serves a vital purpose from a social and economic perspective by meeting housing needs that we had heard of today many times and also yesterday, as well as contributing to society and contributing to economic growth. So considering that and the housing trend, we of course also face more frequent and more severe climatic events that will ask us for having more resilient infrastructure, resilient housing, resilient shelter. Oh, I need the clicker, by the way, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That will ask us for having more resilient housing, more resilient shelter, so to accommodate for the adverse impacts of climate change. However, we also will ask in that infrastructure trend that we are facing for a massive impact on the environmental perspective. So the sector of housing and construction, unfortunately, will negatively release tons of GHG emission, greenhouse gas emission, into the atmosphere. It's unavoidable for now, but we'll get to some recommendations how to mitigate it to the best way possible. And that will trigger environmental hazards such as global warming or human-induced climate change, ocean depletion, as well as biodiversity loss. So just to summarize some of the facts and figures we already heard yesterday, we have a global housing deficit of 1.6 billion people globally, whereas 120 million people here in the Latin American Caribbean region live in inadequate shelter. At the same time, Based on the latest IPCC report, we have 3.3 to 3.6 billion people highly vulnerable to climate change, and over 1 billion urban dwellers living in informal settlements. So that is a precarious situation to face when we think of how that housing and construction sector can actually contribute to climate mitigation and climate adaptation. We also mentioned yesterday the urbanization trends. We have 55% of the world's population living in cities. By 2060, there's going to be 2/3 of the world's population. By 2050, another 2.5 billion people. To make an anecdote, I calculated that is an equivalent of adding an entire New York City to the planet every month for the next 40 years. And on the side, I know that is New York City, so as a reference. But the way we build and construct significantly contributes also to the GHG emission release, which in turn accelerates human-induced climate change. So urban areas account for 3/4 of global energy consumption. They account for 75% of carbon emission and for 75% of the world's natural resource consumption. So the building and construction sector alone is responsible for 40% of global energy-related carbon emission through greenfield development, through cement production, and the burning of fossil fuels such as oil, gas, coal for the construction purpose. And the buildings and construction sector also consumes 50% of all extracted material. These are finite material that we're talking about. Cement production alone contributes to 7% of the world's CO2 emission and is thereby the largest contributor to embodied carbon. So we can't change the housing trend. That's a demand. It's a social issue we need to face. We can't really change much of the urbanization trend and the population growth. We're really trying hard to change something about the climate impact. But even if we mitigate today 100%, we will still have to adapt to the impacts of climate change beyond this century. So with the right to adequate housing in mind, that is anchored in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we need to really rethink the way we design, the way we plan, the way we construct housing and settlements that also embeds reducing GHG emission, environment impacts, and at the same time creates resilience and adaptation. So to understand how to do that, we also need to, of course, understand where are these GHG emissions actually created in that whole value chain. So for example, for construction and buildings, we need to differentiate between embodied carbon and operational carbon. So embodied carbon is the CO2 emission associated with the material and construction process throughout the whole life cycle of a building and infrastructure. So that includes the building, the maintenance, the demolition and recycling of the construction waste. So it's a real life span. The operational carbon, on the other side, is the CO2 emission associated with using the infrastructure. So if you have a residential home, that is heating and cooling, water heating, lighting, cooking, all that. And now bear in mind, with the more frequent and more severe extreme weather events, we will see more of that energy consumption for cooling, energy consumption for heating, and so on. So it is estimated that between 2020 and 2050, new infrastructure will generate half of their emission from that embodied carbon source, such as concrete and steel. And half of the emission is in the energy used during the operation. So however, during the lifespan of a building, which is typical 60 years, the ratio is quite skewed. So in the medium term towards embodied carbon, so the carbon emission that is embodied accounts over the lifespan for nearly 72% of the building emission. So that indicates that the embodied carbon becomes actually over the lifetime a larger portion of the building footprint, carbon footprint overall. Then there is a quote from our former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. The battle against climate change will be won or lost in cities. For effective climate mitigation, it is critical that the built environment addresses both the operational and the embodied emissions, taking a whole life cycle approach into account. On the other side, the housing and construction sector contributes to land degradation and loss of green areas, causing loss of biodiversity, exacerbating floods, exacerbating heat island effect because there's no permeable infrastructure and other climate hazards, making communities that are vulnerable even more vulnerable to climate risks. So inadequate shelter or informal shelter pushes people into that vulnerability, pushes people into residing on fragile land, more susceptible to climate change. But the housing and construction sector, okay, I have 2 minutes, I have to be fast, has also huge potential to contribute to the adaptation. As I mentioned before, if 60% of the infrastructure is yet to be built, then there's a huge time-limited opportunity to actually invest into resilient and adaptive infrastructure. And that's also recognized on global level. So in 2021, 158 countries mentioned buildings in their nationally determined contribution, of which 118 referred to energy efficiency as part of their emission reduction strategy. One of my recommendations is, however, greater political and organizational leadership is really needed to further prioritize and implement actions that support decarbonization and sustainable transition in a just way in this built environment sector. We need to plan for a more compact community and a more compact city, a mix of housing and daily infrastructure, education and employment that should be all in walking distance in best case scenario, but at least in the 50 minutes proximity, 30 minutes proximity that the mayor of Bogota, for example, also mentioned in her examples. So the building codes need to take future climate scenarios into account. So standardized and better insulation can reduce vulnerability to extreme temperature. UN Hábitat, for example, provides architecture design for housing insulation, for housing exposed to storm surges, strong winds, sea level rise, and so on, but also how cities can design flood retention programs or other nature-based solutions for more permeability. And it is important that we really go into scale. So we need multi-stakeholder coalitions. And why I say multi-stakeholder coalition is because we need to set targets, especially towards sustainable and zero carbon resilient buildings. But for that, you need to have your mayors on board. For example, if you look at the National Energy Board, usually cities are not represented. So it's really important to have all sorts of stakeholders in that discussion. And reaching net zero means also we need to change the demand for the materials, switch to low carbon, and maximize energy efficiency. So UN Hábitat has developed an app that's called Sherpa. It's a personal guide to sustainable housing. It assists people involved in housing construction to self-assess actually a housing project, and it's quite a participatory little tool, and helps therefore to reduce costs of production. It helps to understand which of the material could be used and locally sourced and reduce the environmental footprint while also not pushing the cost to the housing owner. So it is important to tap into that circular economy approach as well. And last but not least, because there was actually only 2 minutes left, here quickly just a few of the tools or literatures and how they call it, partnerships that I can recommend. So the Global ABC is the Global Association for Buildings and Construction. They also made a regional report and gave a roadmap on how to achieve most of the recommendations that I mentioned on buildings and construction. Then under the Marrakesh Partnership, there's actually a pathway just on action on human settlements that also has a really nice roadmap. Then we have the Global Status Report from UNEP, and that Habitat tool that I mentioned, Sherpa, and last but not least, the COP27 initiative on sustainable urban resilience for the next generation. All is linked. I hope the presentation will be shared later, so you can access actually also all these materials. And at the very end, all of these publications are also linked, and you can access them when you see the presentation online. It's a bit of a wider scope. It also reflects on climate resilience, planning, urban planning, and I hope that excites you as well. And last but not least, I'll go quickly through. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you so much.
Well, hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice. So, I like that to be on a panel with someone who has done a lot of research. It makes my job very, very easy. I don't have to, say these things over. But I'm going to take it from from a different kind of a perspective. But I'm going to repeat some of the things that Shireen would have said and Angela. Yeah. So just to repeat and just for us to understand sustainability. And the definition that I like is that sustainability is defined as meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability to meet the need of future generations. Now, when you look at the role that housing is playing and the kind of emissions, CO2 emissions that are associated with housing, the input material that goes into housing, and the energy that is used ongoing by the household is something that we need to pay a lot of attention to, And while it is I'm talking from my perspective, from Trinidad and Tobago, we have a well-established policy at a national level for traditional housing. I'm happy to hear that Angela would have indicated that they have gone a step further in terms of having efficiency included in their regulations. That is something that we need to do. If it's not already done on your end, I definitely it has to be done in Trinidad and Tobago and some of the Caribbean islands. Because of the housing deficit, and we know that there are a number of houses that have to come on to satisfy the housing need. It is important that we look at having, I would call, a hard approach, a hard stop approach, in that the new housing that is going to be developed should have included in it efficiency built in. It's important that we look at the material or the input that goes into housing, and it's also important that we look at the energy usage, the efficiency of the energy usage in housing, the efficiency of water usage in housing, so that truly it can become sustainable, and that what we do will not impact not the future generation, but future generations to come, So let me just step aside here. So I would just like to, from Trinidad and Tobago's perspective, we would have identified that this is a key aspect. So we would have launched a study into the introduction of green housing. I will call it greening of housing. Greening of housing in the essence of future housing development should include, as I would have mentioned, efficiency, and look at the existing housing units and retrofitting those units to ensure that they are energy efficient. Can't do anything about the inputs. When you do renovations, we probably can deal with that, but energy efficiency and water efficiency, important. And Serene would have mentioned the circular economy that is required to be built into communities. So obstacles that I would like to highlight and impacts sustainability. Obstacles include subsidies. And from Trinidad and Tobago end, a lot of things are subsidized. Electricity is subsidized. Water is subsidized. The housing units are subsidized. And sometimes it is meant to be, it is meant to ensure that the most vulnerable receive housing. And sometimes you have those who go around the system and are not deserving and end up with housing. So that kind of, in terms of the subsidies, it incentivizes the transition, because the capital expenditure that you'll have to inject, and because the energy is so low, you're not seeing the return. So that kind of subsidy will have to be eliminated. However, in new housing, the incremental costs to ensure that the house is green is actually low. We would have done a recent study, and it's about $1,500 US, just to ensure that your new housing has that energy efficiency or water efficiency built in. Because you will eliminate some of the things that you will have done in traditional housing, and it's replaced by energy efficiency. Am I going for time? What? I'm out of time already? All right, so another obstacle that would have that I would have identified is that lack of clearly defined. Well, let me jump that. I want to talk about the non-articulation on the country level of nationally defined contribution. That NDC, out of the Paris Agreement, each country was to take away the overall goal and break those goals down into country level, called nationally defined contributions. We don't hear that articulated much. And it is important in terms of when you link strategy. When you have the overarching strategy, you need to have that plan broken down, country level, and then broken down or drilled down into institutional level, so that we will understand from our level what is our contribution. Now, some of us or some countries may already have or reached negative carbon emission, but we don't know because the data is not available or not widely available. And we need to ensure that the data is captured, the data is shared at a country level, and that clearly whenever we have the politicians step up and speak about the different things that they are doing to build in resilience and sustainability, ask them, how does that fit in terms of the wider goal? And how, from my level, how is that going to, what I need to do to contribute to ensuring that we reach that goal of negative carbon emission. And with that, I'd like to close, and thank you very much.
Hello? Can you put up the presentation? ¿Me pueden poner la presentación? Gracias. I promise I will be brief. So, good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here, to get to know our neighbors and colleagues from Latin America, the Caribbean, from Spain, from Africa. Our role here in this panel is more as practitioners and as our experience in designing and implementing a natural disaster recovery program with a focus on resiliency. But first, I wanted to give you a little bit of facts about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. We're American citizens. We are not allowed to vote in US presidential elections, nor do we have a voting member in Congress. We have a governor that is elected by the residents of Puerto Rico. We have an average population of 3.2 million individuals, but there's about 5.8 million individuals residing in the United States. We speak Spanish. We're located in the Caribbean next to the Dominican Republic, and we have a beautiful tropical climate and vegetation, but we are susceptible to hurricanes and earthquakes. This was especially our situation in 2017. We were impacted by a very deadly hurricane, and before that, Hurricane Irma. To give you a little bit of perspective, that hurricane in 2017 impacted more than 715 housing units. We have over 1,598,000 housing units in Puerto Rico, and our poverty rate is about more than 43%. With that, after the aftermaths of the 2017 hurricanes, thankfully, Hábitat Puerto Rico has a presence of over 25 years in Puerto Rico. And with the knowledge of Hábitat International in natural disaster response and with private funding, we were able to create a strategy that we call the Puerto Rico Recovery Program. That Puerto Rico Recovery Program is a community-based initiative with a holistic approach. And it is divided, we have divided it into 4 pillars. And the goal of the Puerto Rico Recovery Program is to assist disaster-affected families in Puerto Rico in accessing safe, affordable, and resilient housing. Within those 4 pillars of the Puerto Rico Recovery Program, there are about 12 projects. Within the first pillar, it's construction, and here we focus on new construction and rehabilitation of housing for people who do not own their own homes. And we also have a repair program that we help families who own their own homes but do not have the monetary means to maintain them in safe conditions. The strategy with this construction pillar was to work in non-floodable areas. In Puerto Rico, we have to design to code. We have to abide by the international building code. We used a community-based approach in selecting the communities and individuals that would be impacted with this program. And we also, in the programs where we did new construction or rehab, we tried to focus on acquiring units that were located in areas that had good economic and social opportunities. The second pillar of the Puerto Rico Recovery Program is capacity building. And with that, our strategy is to increase the capacity of the housing stakeholders on the island. This pillar, we divided it into 3 categories. We have the individual and family category, we have the community category, and we have the workforce category. In the individual and family category, we created a home maintenance training program. In the community category, we adapted the pathways to affordable and safe housing. We adapted it to our local context, and we translated it into Spanish. We created a toolkit for it, and we implemented it in 6 communities. At the workforce level, we created a 5-week basic construction skills program. The idea with that was to provide individuals with the opportunity to gain employment in the construction sector, but also to help that construction sector with skilled labor. Right now, there's a lot of need for the reconstruction of the island. There's a lot of funding, but there's no skilled labor to do that. And that's very important if you want to create a resilient program and if you want to build back better. The third pillar is tenure, and we have provided assistance to individuals in being able to gain property title to their homes. And the 4th pillar kind of embraces these 3 pillars that I've been talking to you about, is knowledge management and advocacy. And with that is our commitment to gather the information and the lessons learned in implementing all these projects, and with the commitments such as what we're doing now with sharing with other stakeholders and nonprofits the information that we've gathered in our lessons learned. Also, at the advocacy is that we have learned that we are not only practitioners in Puerto Rico, but we also have the responsibility to be the advocates of the need for affordable housing on the island. And with that, we have invested in research and also in trying to implement public policy with that research. Here kind of gives you a scale of the Puerto Rico Recovery Program. The Puerto Rico Recovery Program is a 5-year program. It ends now in June 2024. After that, we're going to be focusing on new and rehab projects, repair, and also in the construction skills and training. But with this program, we would have been able to impact more than 848 families with our repair and new rehab program. We also had a program with the emergency with Hurricane Maria, and then last year we had another hurricane. As we say, we're prone to hurricanes and earthquakes. So within the 6-year time frame, we've had 2 hurricanes, we've had earthquakes, we have the pandemic, COVID. So we're still standing here. We have a lot of lessons learned. We've been able to build capacity and educate homeowners and also individuals in the construction sector and help them gain title. I also wanted to end this with kind of giving you a face to these programs, which is very important for us. Here we give you an example of a building that we acquired and rehabilitated right in the heart of San Juan in Santurce, which is an area that is developing economically, and we really wanted to give the opportunity for low-income families to be part of that area. Here you have a homeowner who finally got title to the property title to their home, and examples of community participation. This is a map of Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has 78 municipalities. With this program, we would have impacted more than 21 municipalities. So we're really proud of that, and we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in this forum. We want to really reach out to our neighbors in Latin America and Caribbean. We're part of the Caribbean. I think we have a lot to learn, but also to contribute. I want to give a shout out to my colleagues that are here, architect Rafael Osuna and Kevin Campbell. They helped implement this program. And also, we have folders with more information about this Puerto Rico Recovery Program if you're interested in deep diving in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm trying to juggle the mic, the headset, my pen, and the book. All right, great. The reason I didn't comment after each one is because I'm trying to save time. And I had a whole long spiel and speech prepared for you on research and that, and it really doesn't make sense. We've been hearing that over the last day and 3/4. What I want to focus on as I invite you to ask your questions or prepare your questions, I'm going to allow about 3 questions because I want to make sure that we're on time. And let me make this announcement, at least people start walking through the room. After this session, there is the final session, and you're invited into the red room, the ballroom where we were having the main events. We're going to be launching, Habitat for Humanity is launching its 100,000 floor project, and you really don't want to miss that. It is exciting as exciting could be, and you can actually be a part of it. If you're not Habitat, there are other ways you can get involved as donors, as other stakeholders. Just go there and you'll get the opportunity. All right, so make sure you remember that. I think you also invited to rate the program. So in the app, you want to rate these various sessions that you were able to attend, and certainly you want to rate this one. We're hoping that you will. I'm not going to influence whether it's positive or negative, but please rate us. A couple of things I want to mention. Starting with when Angela made her fantastic presentation on policies. We keep hearing the word, as she started it, planning. It wasn't just about the legal frameworks, but it was about implementation, starting with planning. And throughout the conversations, I hope you would have heard planning being mentioned throughout the various themes of the presenters. And I want to highlight that because as we look at the policies that we're going to put in place and the practices, it's very important that we take into consideration the planning aspect of it, but also that we take the inclusivity into it, where we not only allow the policymakers to get involved, but down at the community level, the people must be heard. Sometimes we think because people don't have the educational status like we do, that they don't have the know-how. But believe you me, sometimes they have the practical answers. And if we will only take the time to involve them, then we probably will have a better world. And at minimum, you'll have buy-in from the stakeholders who need to implement all the different policies that we might come up with as government. The other thing I want to mention is that in the sharing of the various practices, I also note very carefully that financing was a theme. Angela would have mentioned, just to recap a little bit, the need for the laws, but not overemphasize the laws unless you add planning to it. The financial, involving the private sector in the financial insurance and assurance aspect of it to protect against catastrophes. She mentioned government, inclusivity and participation, and I think those were some of the themes that other presenters would have alluded to. Siren spent a lot of time telling us about the climate change and the efficiency and highlighted the vulnerability of the world's population. There were staggering statistics there. I think from the presenters in the session before and her presentation, they're certainly beginning to frighten us, and if you're not afraid yet, then something is wrong. The figures are alarming, and it means that we need to do something about it, and something quickly. She mentioned the methodologies and the materials that we use in the construction industry, and they contribute to, even as we look at putting things in place to reduce the carbon footprints, we need to look at our methodologies and materials, we were advised. Couple of things as recommendations: political leadership, organization leadership, both from the aspect of building and energy codes, multi-stakeholder, again, participation at the various levels in terms of strategies and targets, lowering the demand for materials and methodologies, the demand for materials that add to the carbon footprints, the circular economy. I think Brent also alluded to the circular economy, preventing energy waste, global roadmap for building and construction, the action human settlement pathway, and those are some knowledge sharing materials that you can actually look up. Brent mentioned some of the sustainability. Well, he mentioned a nice definition, a very simplistic definition for sustainability. And I put it here: meeting the needs without jeopardizing future needs. I don't know if I said it right, Brent, right? Certainly, as we take those things into consideration, it's very important that we think not only in terms of resiliency, but sustainability. Because it's one thing to be resilient, and it's another to be sustainable. And so we got to watch at the various aspects that goes into planning our resiliency models, our resiliency frameworks. And then Brent shared about the study on the greenhousing that was done in Trinidad, and I rather suspect it might be available soon for us to review. The challenges that impact sustainability. He mentioned subsidies. Now, I know throughout our conversations we've been adding subsidies, but it's one word that in Trinidad I prefer not to hear, because there's so much of subsidies that it almost becomes an expectation by the vulnerable. They sit and expect subsidies, and if it's not given, it's problems. But sometimes subsidies do more harm than good. Just throwing it out there. We look at the incremental costs to energy efficiency, the national development contribution. He mentioned the Paris agreements. And there's another thing that in terms of the stakeholders holding our policymakers to all of the different agreements that they would sign to. You know, they would have these elaborate functions in Europe, and you come back with the Sendai framework and the Paris Agreement and name them. And when you come back, there is very little discussion on holding our policymakers to examining the methodologies, examining the progress, working towards the specific agenda. And I'm just thinking that that's one of the contributions as stakeholders we can take back as another methodology of ensuring good governance as it relates to those multilateral agreements. Amanda would have shared a beautiful story of Puerto Rico. I love the island. Never been there, but I really love it. And how Puerto Rico focused on resiliency, understanding their own precarious situation of hurricanes and earthquakes, where they progress, you can't even get over one and another one hits you. How do they build resiliency? And she showed some beautiful examples of the work they've done, even in the city. The goals on safe, affordable, and resilient housing, which is the language of all of Habitat. The strategic work in non-flooding areas. And so I guess one of the examples is to not build back in areas that are prone to flooding. That seems so simple, but yet, if you look at what we do from time to time in various countries, we spend a lot of money building back in the same place that will flood again. How smart. I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more that I've written down, but I think it's suffice to say that as we look at resiliency and as we think strategy and as we think incorporating stronger planning and governance and inclusivity into resiliency models, as we look at the materials we build with, as we look at our methodologies, we need to go back and make sure that we do something that makes a difference, because as we say, the figures are really alarming, and it behoves us to really do something as stakeholders in this industry. And I'm going to allow for the questions. No, on the mic. On the mic, I'm inviting you to ask a question or two. And if you're very tired, that's fine, because I know the panel was so competent that you don't need to ask questions if you don't
Nadie escribió
wish.
nada.
Okay, so then I will just, pardon?
Did one of these guys have a question for the other?
You want to ask the audience a question? That's a good one.
Or I'm saying if you want to ask one of you, if you want to ask each other a question.
Okay.
Es la otra.
Do you?
Yeah, we're tired. It's the end of the day. Nadie? Nobody? Nadie? Okay. Muy bien. Okay.
Okay, so then let's give the panelists a round of applause, please. I'm sure you agree with me they did a phenomenal job. And before we wrap up, I'm going to allow them each 30 seconds. I'm a good timekeeper. 30 seconds for them to say something to you. 30 seconds. Aside from Cyril.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Don't give up. There is so much negativity in the climate discussion and climate discourse, and I'm good in telling you the fearing story and the bad story. I know I'm good in that, and it is very grim. But on the other side, recently the IPCC had a new chair, and the new chair for the 7th assessment cycle, he said, this is very grim and is really frightening, but we cannot lose the silver lining. We really cannot lose the light at the end of the tunnel, that things are able to move and be different if we really want to. And that goes for housing, that goes for climate, that goes for everything and anything you want to touch. Be motivated, don't give up. We're all in this, and we need to do it for the next generation and for us.
Serene took the words out of my mouth where that is concerned, because we hear a lot of negative and existential threat and it's now global boiling and all these different things, which can, these words are so sensitive it can make persons, give up. It's Armageddon. Let's go and hide because, we need to protect ourselves. But what we need to do, according to Serene and the IPCC chairman, and the new IPCC chairman, we are not to give up. We are to, it's all hands on deck. And we just need to understand from our company level, what is our contribution to be made to this global issue that we need to deal with. Yeah, so that's my closing words. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Well, I just want to say thank you. As I said in the presentation, we were really looking forward to get to know our colleagues and neighbors from Latin America and Caribbean. As you know, we're located in the Caribbean, and sometimes we're stuck in between two worlds. But if one thing I want to say is thank you, and I would love to invite you to Puerto Rico. So even though I gave this perspective about the Puerto Rico Recovery Program, I really feel proud about Puerto Rico. And if you've ever met a Puerto Rican, you're going to have a good time. So Puerto Rico has a lot to offer, where we have been through a lot in the last 6 years, but I think we are talking about resiliency. I think we're the definition of resiliency. So please come visit us. We're a beautiful country full of beautiful people, and we really have a lot to share and learn from you.
Bueno, por terminar, siguiendo ese objetivo de no rendirnos y no aceptar la negatividad, hay un dicho muy famoso, ¿no? De que si no puedes con tu enemigo, únete a él, ¿no? Entonces, teniendo en cuenta que el cambio climático es una realidad, centrémonos en adaptarnos a él, adaptémonos a él de la mejor manera posible, porque eso redundará en nuestra calidad de vida. Y también reitero el agradecimiento por permitirnos estar en este panel, que he disfrutado muchísimo. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. I think it was both the social scientists and Nelson Mandela that said it really only takes a small group of people to make a change in the world and to make big changes. And so we're more than a small group here. So certainly we can go and make a difference. You've learned so many things over the last several sessions. Please go and influence others. And we will certainly have a better world and tell a better story by 2050. God bless you. Remember, we're going to the Roha room. Roha. Thank you to our translators. Thank you very much.